Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, there are three big themes that I seem to be seeing at the moment: sustainability in tech, electric vehicle adoption, and the world of fleet telematics. So today I've invited David Savage, who's the Associate Vice President of the UK and Ireland at a company called Geotab, which is the world's largest commercial telematics company. And with more than 15 years' experience with operations and transport management, David has a proven ability in helping businesses to scale sustainably. And prior to all that, he held the role of General Manager at FreeNow, which you may remember was formerly MyTaxi and Hailo, Europe's leading e-hailing app. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Surrey here in the UK, where David Savage is waiting to speak with us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me today. So my name's David Savage. I'm the Vice President at a company called Geotab for the UK and Ireland. My background is actually quite diverse. I've held a number of operational and commercial roles in a variety of sectors before I made my foray into what I would call the true tech companies over the last 6 years or so. As Vice President for the UK and Ireland at Geotab, my remit is pretty broad. So overall responsibility for strategy, tactics, the team, marketing, and ultimately, delivering growth within the market. So I guess for the benefit of your listeners who may not be aware of who Geotab is and what we do, I'll just spend a few seconds outlining that. So Geotab is a fleet telematics company. And what that ultimately means is that we have a nice little device that can go into any kind of vehicle. And then from that, we can extract billions of data points to help fleet managers and vehicle owners improve the ultimate performance of those vehicles and the wider fleets that they manage. We've been going for over 21 years globally, within Europe for 9 years, and we're now the largest telematics operator in the world with our devices in 2.5 million vehicles now across 130 different countries. So it's a pretty big business overall, but fortunately the team I manage in the UK is a little bit more manageable than that kind of global picture.
There's so much I'm looking forward to talking with you about today. Yes, your technology and the great things that you're doing there, but also your diverse background in tech attracted me to you. So before we begin, what I've got to ask is, can you share your origin story? I mean, where did your passion for technology come from? And what was it that put you on this path that you're on today?
Sure. So, I guess looking back and reflecting on my childhood, I was actually very fortunate. My father spent certainly the first half of his career in IT. And as a byproduct of that, I was fortunate to live in different countries, go to different schools, meet lots of different cultures, and that was great. But also with my father being in IT, that's when I really got my first kind of exposure to technology. And certainly my earliest memory when it does come to technology is probably being about 6 or 7 years old. And nearly every Friday, my dad would bring home, I guess it would be classed as a kind of a laptop, but ultimately it was the size of a suitcase. And, there were a number of games on that. The game I always gravitated towards was called, it was Daley Thompson's Decathlon. I don't know how many of your listeners will remember Daley Thompson, but
I remember that well.
He was a big hero of mine when I was younger.
The 1,500 meters was hard, wasn't it, though?
Yeah. But, it was you had this computer that was the size of a suitcase, as I've said, but the screen was probably no bigger than an iPhone is now. And a keyboard, and you had to control everything through the keyboard, and I loved it. It was incredible to me. So that was probably my first exposure to it, and that kind of morphed as I got older. I had an interest in watches, and calculator watches, data bank watches, and I even had one that could tell the temperature at a point in time. And I've still got that very first calculator watch that I had all of those years ago. And then as I progressed through my kind of teenage years, real interest in cars, which transitioned into motorsports. So, Formula One, still watch it, loyally to this day. And I think everyone's well aware of the kind of technology that's involved there. And then through my school, lots of computer work, took electronics as classes. So, pretty broad spectrum and exposure to various kinds of technology over the course of my childhood, which was really, really great. But I guess as I transitioned through my teenage years, I ultimately decided that I didn't want to follow in my father's footsteps, and actually undertook a degree in marketing. Probably wondering why marketing after I, had exposure to IT through my father. All my uncles and aunts are actually all engineers of some sort. But ultimately, I wanted to do something that was going to allow exposure to commercial and operational disciplines within a business, and marketing felt and read like the best fit at that point in time. So I undertook that degree. It was great. Had a great time at university, as I think many of us did. And then coming out of that, it was, the big next step as to what do I do? And all of my friends and peers at the time were all kind of going into graduate recruitment schemes, banks, FMCGs, you name it. I went for a few interviews there. It just wasn't right for me. I wanted to be able to control my own destiny a little bit, have a degree of autonomy in the roles I was doing. And I didn't feel I was going to get that through those grad schemes. So I tried a few different roles, but ultimately found, my niche initially at Ryanair, of all companies, where it was very much sink or swim. And it was, here's a challenge, do what you need to do to deliver against it. And if you do well, then there'll be another project. And that's really what kind of set me on the path and led me to where I am now. And, I've probably mirrored that throughout my career, working for companies where I've been allowed to blend operational and commercial aspects and build knowledge within those areas, as well as being tasked with a degree of autonomy or trust to deliver results.
What a great story. And I can also, we must be of a similar age, I can also remember Daley Thompson's decathlon on the Commodore 64. I remember the cover, I think it was Ocean Software at the time. So a lot of flashbacks for me as you were sharing your story there. And of course, prior to joining Geotab, you also held the role of general manager at FreeNow, which was formerly MyTaxi and Halo, which was Europe's leading e-hailing app back in the day. So can you tell me more about your time there and how it prepared you for your role now?
Sure. So I guess, how I transitioned into that role, I was probably in my early 30s.
Yeah.
I kind of reached a point within the business and the sector I was in where I was looking for a new opportunity, a fresh challenge. And speaking to a few people I know who are in kind of recruitment, they kind of said, well, actually, your skill set is kind of what tech companies are looking for in the London area now. They're looking for people with a little bit more, let's say, business maturity to come in and, support their growth and take their businesses to the next level. So I interviewed at Halo, met a great guy there, and was fortunate enough to get that position. So, this was back in, when was it? Probably early 2016. Real eye-opener for me, complete roller coaster. My first foray into a venture capitalist-backed business, which was very different to the kind of the privately owned entities I've been involved in before. And I guess reflecting on, that period in particular, it felt like I was learning in dog years. It really was, an accelerated education of everything business related in a hyper growth business. So when I joined that business, I started off in the operations department. I was working with a consultant who'd been brought in to essentially course correct the business and make it appealing to investors. I then spent a year as head of sales and marketing. This was after the merger with MyTaxi, and then latterly as the general manager of FreeNow. And I guess, they were probably trying to break it down into digestible chunks. I'd say there were probably 3 distinct chapters to my time there. So chapter 1, when I joined, was around business recovery. Chapter 2 was the merger, growth, and then 2 rebrands. And then the final chapter of my time there was moving the business, certainly the UK business that I was running, towards profitability. And looking at it becoming a broader mobility platform. And, certainly in the 18 months or so that I've left, been out of that business now, I've seen the accelerated transition towards that broader mobility offering, particularly in the UK and the Irish market. And I guess, the lessons I learned, or my top 3, let's say, takeaways from my time there were: perfection is the enemy of growth. You need to really recruit based on cultural fit and talent. Talent alone is not enough and can actually be very disruptive. and that the team or the business or the product must be customer focused. They ultimately pay the bills. And if you ever lose sight of that, it's a slippery slope.
There's so many great insights from that early part of your journey. And of course, that path led you to Geotab, which, as you said at the very beginning, is a telematics provider, which is committed to advancing technology, empowering businesses, and making the road safer for everyone. But we will have people listening all over the world, and a lot will be hearing about you for the first time. So could you just set the scene and tell them about the kind of problems that you're solving with your tech and what it is that makes you different from, let's say, other telematics solutions out there?
Sure. So what really drew me to Geotab when I had that initial approach was how they were using, or how we are now using, data to deliver insights. It was one of my observations through the Halo My Taxi Free Now aspect, that we were gathering all of these data points, but we weren't really interpreting them perhaps as well as we could have done at that time. So when I was researching Geotab, ultimately when it came to telematics, my assumption was, it's a GPS on a map. Actually, it was going much deeper than that. And you talked about societal change in the kind of introduction to this question. And that's just one of the many aspects that the data that telematics can pull from a vehicle can help deliver against. So within Geotab, we operate against what we call 6 pillars of innovation. So they can be productivity, optimization, safety, compliance, expandability, and sustainability. Now, we gather over 40 billion data points on a daily basis, so gathering data is not an issue, but it's supporting the end customers on having the insights to really deliver the performance they need from the vehicles they have under management. And when we're talking about fleets within Geotab, certainly from our perspective, our smallest fleet has 2 vehicles, and our largest fleet has over 200,000 vehicles. So, it's a very, very broad spectrum, and the challenges can vary depending on the size of the fleet, the vehicles within the fleet, etc. But just to give a little insight into, I won't cover all of those pillars, but just a few of them. So, productivity, for example, if you, let's say, Neil, you've got, 5 vehicles, 10 drivers within your fleet, for example, we can help get insights to help improve driver behavior, optimize the routing and dispatching. So, it's a bit like sat-nav, really, looking at the quickest route, and also decreasing maintenance costs. From a fleet perspective, any vehicle that is in the garage getting fixed for whatever reason is not earning money for the company. So through data insights and pulling data from the engine, looking at driver behavior, etc., we can really help with all of that. One of the other areas is compliance. So when we think about compliance, we typically think that this is driven by government or policy or legislation. It can also be driven by end customer requirements. They might have specific needs that they need to be delivered against. So one example here would be our tachograph solution, which is typically used in trucks and buses. And what that can do is really help looking at the driver status, looking at how long the drivers are being in the vehicle, moving around, and really ensuring that employees are complying with European regulations, for example. And also encouraging drivers to take, proper breaks, ensure they're well rested, and ultimately, when they're operating the vehicles, they're reducing the chance of injuring themselves and other road users. And then finally, the point I'll touch upon is sustainability. Now, when we think about sustainability, particularly within the sector I'm operating in, the natural inclination is to think about electric vehicles. But actually, sustainability from a fleet management perspective is much broader than that. So, for example, we help fleets look at reducing their CO2 emissions but by providing real insights into what they can do with their existing petrol and diesel vehicles. And things we can do there, like reducing idling, so essentially when a vehicle's parked with the engine still on, the route planning aspect I touched upon earlier, and driver behavior. So, as I've moved into this sector, it's been interesting to look at the impact of driver behavior on emissions and vehicles, etc. But just a little snapshot here is that a driver that's harshly braking or harshly accelerating increases CO2 emissions. That's a little bit of an interesting insight. And then a big aspect, which there's very few conversations that we're not part of nowadays that don't involve this, and that is electric vehicle transition and how our platform and tools can support that.
It's a great point you made there about sustainability. And I think it's another timely reminder of just how much has changed in the last 2 years from our behavior, thinking, how we work, and our attitudes to the environment. So much in such a short amount of time. I'm curious, have you seen fleet telematics evolve over the last few years and the kind of technologies that are increasingly playing that critical role in the industry now?
Yeah, so you've touched upon it there. Really in the last 2 years, there's been a real concerted push towards fleet electrification, and understanding how that can be delivered. And this is a sea change for people operating and managing fleets. You've got to remember that there'll be people with years, maybe even decades of experience in managing petrol and diesel vehicles, and they'll know those intimately. But actually, electric vehicles, even though they might look the same roughly from the outside, operate quite differently from electric vehicles. So that's a lot of the asks that we're getting nowadays. It's, can you support on our electric vehicle transition? What do we need to do that? And this is really where, from our perspective, the intersection between sustainability and technology comes into play. And at that intersection, from our perspective, and certainly my perspective as well, would be data. Data really needs to be able to support decision making and provide the insights that are needed when it comes to making sustainable business decisions and implementing practices. So without going into too much detail about that, it's important to use data to understand where you are now, and not everyone does, where you want to go, and ultimately how you'll be able to get there and how quickly you'll be able to get there. And data can really help build that roadmap. And that's the value add of Geotab.
Yeah, I love that, and how it's data-driven, because with the rise of electric vehicle adoption, there really just seems to be this intersection of sustainability and technology and of course, data. But can you expand on that and how you see that evolving too?
Yeah, so if we look at those kind of three scenarios or 3 or 4 scenarios I was talking about there. So if you're looking at a fleet, and let's say, Neil, you own a fleet again, I'll use you as the case study here. And let's say you've got 50 vehicles and it's a mixture of different manufacturers, and you've got petrol cars and you've got diesel vans, and you've got a pretty broad spectrum there. You want to make that transition to EV, because there are, let's be honest about it, there are tax benefits, there are financial benefits, and it's ultimately been driven by legislation, particularly in the UK and Ireland. Where do you start? And that starting point is understanding the performance of your existing vehicles. So what are they doing now? How far are they typically driving? What temperature conditions are they driving in? What kind of weight are they carrying? Using those as kind of basic data points. So our solution would gather that data, and we can gather it from anywhere from 1 month up until 12 months. 3 months is around optimal, but that's the kind of time frame we would look at. So we'll ingest all of that data, and the platform is customizable. So let's say, Neil, you knew that temperature ranges you were operating in were like minus 20 degrees to plus 20 on average, let's say. And that you had a pricing model you were working to, the kind of budget you had against a vehicle, whether that was renting it or buying it outright. You can put all of those parameters into that. And then our platform will make a recommendation as to how many vehicles within your fleet could be transitioned, to electric vehicles at this point in time. And what I really like about our platform is it's delivering very much a measured recommendation. So it's not saying, absolutely, 100% of your vehicles can go. It's saying at this point in time, based on what's available in the market, out of those 50 vehicles, you could transition 20 or you could transition 30. But you'll know that by ingesting that original data, running it through the platform, that the vehicles you would ultimately decide to lease or buy and bring into your fleet are not going to have any negative operational impacts on your business. And that is kind of, that's critical, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, when it comes to the platform as well, because you're still going to have those petrol and diesel vehicles within your fleet, our platform allows that single point, that single view. So you can look at those petrol and diesel and the electric vehicles and see them all on one dashboard, manage them all through one platform, which is it just makes life easier, is ultimately what it comes down to. And then when you make that transition to actually operating those vehicles, some of the parameters you're going to be looking at are different. It's going to be the vehicle range, the state of charge in a vehicle. When's the best time to charge that vehicle? And they're all aspects that we can support on.
I think through the story, the power of your storytelling and power of suggestion, we might accidentally manifest Neil's haulage company from this podcast as well. With these examples.
We're always in the market for new customers, Neil.
I'm curious though, because the success of any technology, no matter how good it is adoption. So are you seeing an increase in electric vehicle adoption? Because we're hearing all the stories. We know electric vehicles are entering the road. There's talk of autonomous lorries in the future, but how are you seeing adoption in this field?
So I would say the desire is incredibly high.
Yeah.
But let's not forget, as I've touched upon, most fleets are only about 18 months into this journey. So they're still trying to figure out what are the right steps forward. So there's absolutely been an acceleration in uptake, for sure. But I'd say there's been an even greater acceleration in the desire to understand how to make the next steps. And I think what's really helped to drive this, particularly over this last 18 months we've spoken about, I think part of it has been COVID, if I'm being honest. It's allowed and maybe even forced some companies and individuals to reflect on who they are, the society we're living in, maybe the importance of the environment that we all took for granted pre-COVID, and making those societal and economic changes. And there's also been the government drive as well. Certainly in the UK, they're banning the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030. And the government have implemented a little bit of a carrot and stick approach. So on the stick side of it, there's ultra low emission zones, and then there's the ban on vehicles. And then from the carrot side of it, you've got the grants, tax breaks, salary sacrifice schemes that are starting to become more prevalent. And I guess just a little bit of insight, we undertook a study fairly recently using our EVSA platform that I kind of outlined earlier, across just under 3,500 vehicles from 51 different customers operating in 14 different business sectors. And what we actually found is that 40% could make the switch to electric vehicles right now. When we conducted this analysis pre-COVID, it was in single figures. So just the increase in what could be done, married to the desire to get there, I think it's going to explode. That's certainly what we're seeing in the market in the next, year or so. If anything, I guess the question is, are the manufacturers going to be able to manufacture enough vehicles to deliver what the fleets need? I think that's the kind of the big and quite topical question at the moment. And I guess from a consumer perspective, it's maybe even a little bit more challenging. You look at the cost of an electric vehicle, the upfront cost looks incredibly high in some instances. But when you actually look at, what we call the total cost of ownership, really looking at the lifetime ownership of that vehicle, in terms of, you're not going to be having to refuel it to the same expense as you would petrol. Typically the electric costs are around 40 to 50% of filling up at the pumps. Maintenance is going to be less. You factor all of that in, and actually over the lifetime of the vehicle, for many people, it would actually make sense to transition their existing vehicles to electric, as long as they've got the infrastructure to support it in terms of charging capability. But just going back to our business and your point, Neil, I can't recall a single discussion, certainly since the start of this year, with our partners, going through to end customers, where there hasn't been a component of how can you help us transition to electric vehicles, and how can we do it? What's the time frame look like, and what should we be aware of? So it's I think most fleets in the UK are around 8% transitioned on average. That's going to accelerate greatly in the next 12 to 18 months. I'm in no doubt.
Before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a little bit of research on you guys. I also learned that you recently launched a cold chain solution here in the UK. So can you expand on that for anyone that's missed that announcement?
Sure. So I should probably just give a bit of an outline as to what cold chain actually is, because not everyone will be aware of it. So cold chain, let me think about the best way of describing this. It's ultimately, let's say, put it at a basic level, deliveries that require a temperature-controlled environment. So if we think about food deliveries, beverages, pharmaceutical, COVID vaccines, they need to be maintained at a certain temperature. And that's what cold chain monitoring is about. It's about monitoring the temperature in the back of a van or a truck to make sure that it is meeting essentially compliance needs. And as I touched upon earlier, compliance could be an end customer requirement, or it could be a mandatory legislative requirement. And ultimately what our solution, or the benefits of our solution, should I say, are that, there's full temperature control, there's two-way reporting, and there's real-time data available. And we see this as really being quite crucial. And it's, based on a lot of feedback we've had in the last 18 months during COVID, which is one of the reasons why we pushed to launch this product. We think about how reliant we've all become on last mile delivery, food deliveries, pharmaceutical deliveries in some cases. Certainly if I think about my grandparents, they've become reliant on that, for example. Allied to the driver shortage we're seeing within the haulage sector, there is less opportunity to allow products to decay, let's say, in the back of a vehicle. We can't allow that wastage, particularly when we've seen in the news that, price of food, et cetera, may increase now. So making sure that goods depart and are delivered, not just on time, but in a very good condition, whether that is pharmaceuticals, food deliveries, et cetera, is critical. And that's what our solution can help solve for. So that we're really excited to see, how the market receives it. We only launched it a couple of weeks ago. We've had very positive feedback about that. It's addressing a bit of a need in the market for some of those smaller players who, are looking for that kind of solution, and also whose businesses have scaled during COVID, those kind of last mile delivery companies I've spoken about. So yeah, we're really excited to see how it's received, and feel as though it's addressing a real need in the market.
Excellent. And of course, summer's all but over now. We're starting to think about pumpkin spice lattes, Black Friday deals, and the holiday season ahead, and maybe what life's going to have in store for us in 2022 and beyond. So what excites you about the road ahead?
Hey, look, I'm loving my role. I'm loving my team. Really enjoying what we're doing at Geotab, both at a local and a global level. So I'm really excited to be able to play a small part in contributing to the growth of Geotab in the Irish and the UK market, and also particularly when it comes to EV and sustainability, knowing that our solution and our team is really helping to make a positive change, even though it might be a small change. On society by supporting, fleet electrification, reducing emissions. And as someone who was a bit of a petrol head in the past, my mind has really shifted. As I said, before we started this podcast, my daughter's just started school, and, I want to make sure that, I can make, and my team can make a small part in ensuring that she, environmentally, she has, somewhere very nice to grow up in and into. And I think we all have a duty to try and to make a contribution towards that.
Love that, and completely agree with you. And we started the podcast today talking about your diverse background in tech and the journey that you've been on. But I'm now going to have a bit of fun with you and ask you, what is the soundtrack to that journey that you've been on? Is there a particular song that has accompanied you throughout your career, or just something that helps you get your head in the zone, or especially before a big meeting or going on stage? Is there a song and a story you can share with us today?
Yeah, there's one I probably always go back to. I might not always play it before certain meetings because it might give me the wrong kind of energy. But it's It's from the Rocky films. It's a song called "Gonna Fly Now" by Bill Conti.
Love it.
And why that song? I always loved the Rocky films growing up. Still do. But what, to me, it paints the arc of life and business. If you look at the Rocky films, might be trying to go a little bit too deep and read too much out of it, but there's an interesting arc in the stories. There's always a challenge or opportunity, work done to try and overcome it. May not always succeed, but you keep moving forward. And for me, success is always about trying to move forward, and learning from those challenges that weren't overcome. So that's the song that has been probably a constant from my teenage years all the way up until now.
And as a guy that would probably choose No Easy Way Out from the Rocky IV soundtrack, I applaud that choice.
That was close.
But before I let you go, for anyone listening wanting to find out more information about Geotab, contact your team if they've got any questions, what's the best starting point?
Sure. Well, have a look at our websites. We've got UK and Irish websites. So, just Google Geotab and you'll get the URLs for those. We've got a good presence on LinkedIn. There's plenty of videos on YouTube if people would like to learn more about the business and the solutions we have. And if anyone would like to connect or have discussions with me personally, I'm on, LinkedIn, pretty active on there. So, feel free to connect or pop me a message and, happy to pick up the conversations.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today about the intersection of sustainability and technology, including electric vehicle adoption, fleet telematics and cybersecurity. But more than anything, how it was all washed down with your very human story and beginning when you were playing Daley Thompson's decathlon on your dad's huge laptop all those years ago. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing it with us all today.
Great, Neil. Thanks for the time. Really enjoyed it.
Wow, we covered a wide scope of topics, from the growing conversations around the intersection of sustainability and tech, including electric vehicle adoption, fleet telematics, cybersecurity, and so much more. So, David, if you are listening back to this, a big thank you for taking the time to come on and sharing that story. But I'm now going to put the microphone over to everyone listening, wherever you are in the world. I want to hear from you. I record this show every day to try and connect with every one of my readers and listeners. So, remember, I'm the easiest guy in the world to find. Email, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, and LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, @NeilC.Hughes. But that's it for today. I'll return again tomorrow. I already have a great guest lined up for your podcast feed. I've been organised this week, so that is on its way to you. But a big thank you for listening today. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.